great to be back here in Coeur d'Alene. And what an honor to be here on the 35th anniversary of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations and at its 19th annual banquet. It's really remarkable if you think about it, that this organization has been around 35 years and that this banquet's been going on for 19 years. And I think we know from the mayor as to the engine behind all of that. I want to thank Tony for inviting me. A few years ago, the National Education Association honored Tony at our annual Human and Civil Rights Award dinner. I had the pleasure of introducing Tony to the NEA, and I said then, and I say now, I have never met any person who is more committed to championing human and civil rights than Tony Stewart. Thank you, Tony, for continuing to be an inspiration to us. I moved to Coeur d'Alene in the early 1980s as a community organizer for Idaho Fair Share, as Tony indicated. And from the get-go, those people who were here then and welcomed me, they patiently tutored me about the correct pronunciation of C-O-E-U-R. You see, I was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. And down there we said Coeur, but I soon learned that here it was core, as in core values. I have to tell you that Coeur d'Alene has always held a very, very special place in my heart. I'll always cherish the warmth and friendships that I experienced here, the brave people I met and came to know have really made a lifetime imprint on me. And I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about that lifetime imprint that's been happened to me. The Reverend Rick Morris, who was one of the founders of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations in that meeting that was held early on that Tony and Marshall participated in, he served on the Fair Share sponsoring committee for the community organization I was trying to build here, as did Scott and Mary Lou Reed and Father Bill Wasmuth and other community leaders, some of whom are probably in this room. I was a staunch supporter of the task force for as long as I lived here. And in 1988, I was elected to the Idaho State Senate with the help of many people in this room. To this day, I am still in awe of what the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations has accomplished and how you have accomplished it. You showed us how to do something that's sorely lacking in America today. You showed us how a group of good citizens, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, can work together for the greater good of a community. You showed that citizens who come from different walks of life, whether you're from business or education, government, the faith community, and the Coeur d'Alene tribe, how you can awaken the people of Idaho to what happens to a community when the rights of even one person are trampled on. Today, at a time in our country when there is so much division, when there is a rising tide of violence and bigotry aimed at Muslim Americans, Hispanics, immigrants, blacks, LGBT people, I think the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations could serve, frankly, as a model to the nation. And I really believe that. I go to lots of places, ladies and gentlemen. I see lots and lots of hate being perpetrated across the country, playing itself out in a variety of ways. And I always remember when I was here in the 80s, the work that you all did in this particular community and the work that has continued for 35 years, and it is just remarkable. Let's give yourself a hand. So let us never forget that at the time the task force was being organized, the Aryan Nations was the most visible white supremacist group in the United States. Nationwide, it had about 20,000 white supremacists under its influence. Its leader, Richard Butler, had managed to unite traditional racists, such as the Klan, with modern-day neo-Nazis, such as the skinheads and the white Aryan resistance, with the hate-all-government groups, such as the Posse Comitatus. In the early 1980s, there were 75 to 100 people living in the Aryan Nations compound at Hayden Lake. Some were engaged in paramilitary training. These were the stormtrooper faction of the Aryan Nations, known as the Order. They went on to commit mayhem throughout the West, robbing banks and discount stores, assassinating a Jewish talk show host in Denver, and killing law enforcement officials in several states. Others at that compound were busy churning out propaganda that was mailed throughout the nation from Coeur d'Alene. At one point, it was about 1,000 pieces of hate literature a day at their peak. Let us never forget that when the Aryan Nations followers painted anti-Semitic graffiti on Sid Rosen's restaurant, they did it not only because they hated Jews, but because they wanted to drive Rosen, his family, and all Jews out of northern Idaho. In addition, they wanted to drive all ethnic minority people out as well. They wanted northern Idaho for people who looked like them and hated like them. To stand up to the Aryan Nations, people who were rabid with hate, people who thrived on intimidation, threats, and violence, to stand up to them was patriotism at its finest. Absolute patriotism. And ladies and gentlemen, these heroes are in our midst. Those people who got together, originally organized by a woman named Dina Tanners and Rick Morris from the church up on 4th Street, Bill Wasmuth and Marshall Mend, Tony Stewart and Norm Gissel, Jeannie DeLong, lots of other people, and other task force activists represented here over 35 years, always, in my mind, will be all American heroes. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Many of these people, and some of you in this room, were threatened and harassed by the Aryan Nation zealots. And Bill Wasmuth had the back of his house blown up while he was sitting in his living room. Wasmuth was a Catholic priest and pastor at St. Pius X Church. He happened to be my priest. Richard Butler had been quoted in the paper a few days before the bombing and said, "Wasmuth is a Jew impersonating a priest." The day after the bombing of his house, as the story goes, Wasmuth called Marshall Mend, and he said, "Well, Marshall, I've been a Jew for less than 48 hours, and so far, I don't like it." And Marshall laughed, and he said, as Marshall would say, "Once a Jew, always a Jew." Wasmuth found himself laughing, too, for the first time since the bombing. Yet the task force soldiered on, fighting darkness with light, countering hatred with human rights, and you made the celebration of human rights a powerful weapon in the fight against fear a fear that was pervasive in this community at the time. The task force taught us all that we cannot ignore bigotry and accept that it will just go away. That doesn't work. We have to challenge the bigots while educating those who pretend that they're simply not here. I think it is a tribute to the task force's deep and abiding work in this community that when some whites gathered outside a newly opened Mexican restaurant waving signs, "Keep Coeur d'Alene White," people from this community flocked to the restaurant in solidarity with the Mexican-American owners. That is a tribute to this community and the work of the task force. That was a beautiful and loving thing that happened. It was also beautiful that the task force was instrumental in persuading Coeur d'Alene to pass an ordinance prohibiting discrimination against LGBT people in employment, housing, and all facilities open to the public, including businesses. Now, I go to a lot of places across this country, and we've recently seen the states of North Carolina and Mississippi do exactly the opposite. They passed laws allowing discrimination and overturning local ordinances like the one that exists here in Coeur d'Alene. But today, the Aryan Nations is no more. Thanks to people like Norm Gissel, Ken Howard, Morris Dees, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, its compound is now a peace park. And let's not forget Larry Broadbent, who's not with us anymore but played a major role in that effort. Richard Butler has been dead for 12 years, and in case you missed it, the last proclaimed leader of the Aryan Nations, Morris Gullett, a disciple of Butler's, called it quits last year. He closed down its so-called headquarters in Converse, Louisiana, and pulled the plug on the Aryan Nations website. That's right. It's never good to gloat, and we know that there are still plenty of hardcore white supremacists still out there in our country. But I think the people in this room tonight deserve to take a moment to savor the passing of the Aryan Nations. That's a result of the work that you all did, and you should be very proud of it. So, what's next for Kootenai County? No community is an island, and our nation is changing fast. 50 years ago, whites made up 83% of our nation's population. Today, that share has shrunk to 62%, and according to the Census Bureau, in just 28 years, there will be no racial majority in America. Clap. Just as today, in the business I am in, there is no racial majority in our public schools across the country. Our society's growing diversity makes some whites uneasy, and it even drives a few of them to go crazy. Since we elected our nation's first black president in 2008, we've seen an increase in the number of hate and extremist anti-government groups in America. Clearly, we cannot go to sleep. We cannot forget the terrible damage that overt racism does to a community and a nation. And I say to you tonight, long live the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations. Overt racism is not the only social virus that threatens our society. There is also a covert problem of institutional racism, and it is insidious. So what is the definition of institutional racism? It is the norms, policies, and practices that are structured into political, societal, and economic institutions that have the net effect of imposing oppressive conditions and denying rights, opportunity, and equality to identifiable groups based upon race or ethnicity. So let me give you a couple of examples. Last year, researchers sent out thousands of resumes to employers with openings, randomly using some stereotypical black names like Jamal, and others that were more likely to belong to whites, like Ethan. A white name increased the likelihood of a callback by 50%. Another recent study showed that when blacks and whites go in person to rent or buy properties, blacks are invariably shown far fewer options. Mind you, these studies weren't conducted in 1955. They were done in 2015. And yet, according to public opinion polls, many whites today believe that discrimination based on race is a thing of the past and equal opportunity is the norm in America. Moreover, many lower-income whites are convinced that minorities now enjoy more opportunity than they do. But just as we saw in the crucial areas of employment and housing, the facts argue otherwise. What about in my field, education? Many think racism in U.S. schools ended 62 years ago with the Brown versus Board desegregation decision. Again, the facts argue otherwise. The facts show institutional racism pervades K-12 public school systems. Take discipline, for example. Black youth make up 16% of public school students, yet they account for 35% of out-of-school suspensions, 46% of the multiple out-of-school suspensions, and 39% of those students who are expelled. Research shows that white students are punished less severely for the same infractions that get black students suspended and expelled. And the statistics for American Indian and Hispanic students are almost as bad. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's the thing. If students aren't in school, they can't learn. What's more, if you look at college prep programs in schools, such as advanced placement or international baccalaureate, you will see that African American, American Indian, and Hispanic students are seriously unrepresented. Most significantly and most damning, look at funding. The data clearly shows that majority black, brown, and Native American schools are chronically underfunded compared to white majority schools in richer school districts. This means the black, brown, and Native American kids are more likely to have outdated textbooks and technologies, overcrowded classrooms, less experienced teachers, and less one-on-one instructional time, less access to school nurses, counselors, and psychologists. Our nation promises opportunity for all, but in education, the great enabler of opportunity, we are failing to deliver on that promise. Institutional racism is one of the contributors and a great denier of opportunity. So last summer, the National Education Association's Representative Assembly, with over 7,000 delegates that meet annually, unanimously adopted a bold new business item on institutional racism. It calls on the NEA, my organization, to take the lead by spotlighting systemic patterns of racism and injustice, and to use our collective voice to demand change in the policies, programs, and practices that perpetuate racism in our public schools. I have to tell you that I have never been prouder of my organization. When 7,000 delegates vote unanimously at our organization to pass a new business item, I don't think I've ever seen it before. More than 80% of our members are white. This challenge we have undertaken is not about blame or guilt. It's about awareness. It's about bringing racism out of the shadows and into the light. It's about educators of all colors holding those very uncomfortable conversations about race with each other, with their school boards, and with state policymakers, and with parents in the community and their students. To become part of the solution rather than the problem, I think white educators have to acknowledge their unconscious bias. And I believe that I have something to say about that, because I know from personal experience, this is really hard work. So as you might see from who I am, I'm a white guy. Pretty obvious. I was born into white privilege. My family was very enlightened on the matter of race. Nevertheless, I received a heavy dose of white privilege from the society and my class background and the culture in which I grew up. There was no escaping it. I had to face up to the fact that I have internalized, biased, and racist stereotypes about people of color. The question was, what am I going to do about it? I could pretend that there are no biased, racist stereotypes inside me. I could claim something like, I'm colorblind. That's called denial. And what I've come to learn is that denial is the life support system of racism. I became convinced that it is better to confront the demons, and with the help of wise and experienced guides, I've tried to do that. They helped me overcome the defenses that I had erected, and then to see and understand the unconscious biases and racist stereotypes within me. I never could have done it myself, and yes, it's taken time. And one thing I've learned along the way is that confronting the demons of racism within is not about purging oneself of those demons. They're probably inside me to stay. But by calling them out, I have gained a measure of power over them. Please notice, I say a measure of power, because I've come to understand that calling out the demons of racism within me is a lifetime pursuit. It is a journey. It is not an exercise in catharsis through guilt, however. Guilt is not productive. It won't sustain you. But positive and purposeful anti-racist action is quite invigorating. And I learned that lesson long ago in this town from the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations. This is where the journey began. This is where the journey began to start self-reflecting as to who I was, raised in the South, in white privilege, how in fact I needed to wrestle with those issues. So what is this white privilege that I've been talking about? This is what I've learned. I've learned it's white privilege to ignore the fear that lurks in every Black, Hispanic, or Native American parent with a teenage boy. What will happen to my son if he gets pulled over and stopped by the police? Will he get thrown to the ground, handcuffed and humiliated? Will he have a loaded weapon pointed at his head? Will he be tasered? I learned that it's white privilege to opt out of the uncomfortable discussions about racism, leaving people of color to shoulder the burden of dealing with the issue of racial inequality in our society. I've learned that it's white privilege to insist that we are now a race-neutral country because we elected a black president. We are not now, nor have we ever been, a race-neutral country. It goes way back. On his first night in the New World, Christopher Columbus wrote in his diary, "The natives look well-bodied and strong. They should make excellent servants." And so it began. And so our journey must continue. One sociologist has described unconscious bias as racism without racists. Combined, white privilege and unconscious bias power institutional racism. By acknowledging these forces, I believe NEA and our members are positioning ourselves for the task of uprooting institutional racism in education with the help of our students, their families, and communities. Will this be a monumental task? Of course it will. But so was the abolition of slavery and the overturning of state-enforced desegregation. Now it's our turn. We have to have constructive and authentic conversations about racism, always keeping in mind that opportunity for all is our goal. Then we must take action based on our core belief in the worth and dignity of every human being and every student. This brings me full circle back to you. The people that I really believe are the human rights patriots of Kootenai County. They're in this room. You all are patriots. Social justice patriots beyond any measure. The people who started this organization taught me and taught us and continue to teach us that good people working together can indeed summon the better angels of our nature. It's remarkable in northern Idaho that this organization exists and the accomplishments that I articulated earlier. And in closing, I would like you to allow me to channel one of those angels, Bill Wasmuth. So as I said earlier, Bill Wasmuth was my priest. He baptized me, he confirmed me. I converted to Catholicism here in Coeur d'Alene. We had lots of conversations. And at the midst of all of that, it was the height of the Aryan Nation's assault on this community. And Bill, I was reminded by Marilyn Schuler the other day about something he said quite often, which he said, racism is like an iceberg. And we often only see the tip of it because it's the most overt. But if you're really going to tackle racism and human rights and civil rights, there's a whole bunch of ice under the water. And he's exactly right in his articulation of that. The task seems monumental. And we have to dive into that water and look under the tip of that iceberg. These are the words that he spoke in an outdoor human rights rally here in Coeur d'Alene as the Aryan Nation thugs glowered at him. Yes, we stand for the dignity of each person and no to racism and prejudice. We say yes to nonviolence and peace and no to hate and violence. We say yes to unity and no to division. Thank you, Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, for all you have done, and many years ago getting me started on this personal journey, which is manifesting in my organization, the National Education Association. Thank you very much.